amazing. God is with us. I think. Yes, we're live. Adam, it started.
Live.
Yes, it's not like an introduction. Okay. So for everybody watching at home, you missed the introductory announcements, but that's okay. If you want to see our schedule online, just go to our website at torontotorah.com. There's information there on the schedule for the day. You can make donations there. The shiurim will be posted both on Facebook Live and on YU Torah sometime, probably tomorrow. Okay, so now to our first shiur. That's our introductory announcements to our first shiur. So, obviously, if we're starting a program on Tanach, we need to start with the, as my son would say, the T, right? The tough. We'd have to start with the beginning. We have to start with CHUMASH. Now, CHUMASH is something that we are familiar with. We read it every year in shul. Many of us do Shtei Mikra, and we're Maver Sedra. We learn the Parsha every week. And even if we don't, we're familiar with the stories in Tanach. We know about the Avot. Maybe we don't know every name of every tribal leader and every place where the Jews stopped when they were traveling through the desert, and the name of every king from Edom. But we know the main stories, right? We know that Vayikra is filled with a lot of details about sacrifices that we don't necessarily understand, but we know that it's there. We know that Ziring is Moshe's last speech, even if we don't know everything in it. So someone approached me on Shabbos, and he told me that he thought the hardest shiur of the day would be this one, would be CHUMASH. Because what am I going to add? Meaning, yes, we all go to Parsha Shiurim, and we know that there are details in CHUMASH that we don't know as well as we could. So we go to Parsha Shiurim and we learn something new. But what am I going to do in 45 minutes and an hour, speaking about all of CHUMASH? What am I going to do that people don't know? Right? CHUMASH is not something... Look, I'm willing to bet that most people, I could give a shiur on, I don't know, Yoel, and I could just summarize the book, and most people, that's enough. I've introduced you to the book of Yoel. But CHUMASH, we know Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Moshe, Aaron, etc. So what am I going to add? So, I'm going to try. I call this shiur a divine play in 5 acts, the Torah. Because the one thing that I think is important, that's critical to understanding the Torah, to understanding the Word of God, that we don't think about nearly enough, is that these are 5 books. We tend to think of CHUMASH in one of 2 ways. Either as one book, the Torah, or we think about it in Parshia, or we think about it in Prakim, in chapters. But that is all a mistake. All of that is a mistake. Okay? When Chazal say there are 24 books in Tanach, 5 of them are Bereshit, Shemot, Vayikra, Bamidbar, and Dvarim. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. There are 5 books, and it's not by accident. And Chazal know there might be 7, but that's a shiur for another time. There are 5 books. Parshio, the fact that we read it every week and divide the year, that is, in the history of time, pretty late. In Bavel, they try to read the Torah every year. So we divide the parashiot so that we read them every year, and we finish them around Sukkot time, on Simchat Torah, on Shmini Atzeret. Why we do that, unclear. Possibly to commemorate Hakel, which would happen at that time, which was the national reading of the Torah. In Eretz Yisrael, they didn't do that. In Eretz Yisrael, they read the Torah every 3 years, or 3.5 years in the better manuscripts, probably every 3.5 years. Why every 3.5 years? So that comes back to the Hakel point. I mentioned that every 7 years the king would have a public reading of the Torah. If you read the Torah every 3.5 years, then every second cycle they would finish at the end of Sukkot, which was when the king would have a public reading of the Torah at Hakel, and our Simchat Torah seems to be, according to many, a level of commemoration of that act, a communal celebration of the Torah, which we now move every year. But when they had the triennial cycle, they didn't have our Parshio. The Prakim are even later and they're not even Jewish. The chapters are Christian division. They're very helpful. We use them. It's much easier to reference and say Genesis 21:7 than it is to say whatever that is, right? The 500th verse in Bereshit. That's not exactly an easy thing to say. But Jewish division of the Torah, there's two Jewish divisions to the Torah. One is what's called the Parsha. The Parsha is not what you think it is. It's not what we read every week. The Parsha is if you open a Chumash or you open a Tanach, right, and you see the little breaks over here, right, that little space over here, that's a Parsha. Right? The Jewish division are these little units. If you're reading in Torah, you know this, that it is there. Sometimes it'll end at the end of a line, sometimes it won't. Difference between a Tucha and a Stuma. That's one division, what's called a Parsha. The other division is book, is Sefer. There are 5, right? And those books, and this is what we're going to try to focus on, those books have themes. They're not divided simply because the Torah is too long to read as one continuous book. It is long. It is 5,888 psukim according to Chazal, and according to our count, it's 5,845. It is long. That would be a long single chapter, admittedly. So we divide it into books. But it isn't haphazard. There is a logic to it. There is rhyme or reason, and that's what I want to do in the 40 minutes that we have, is to understand what are these things that we call chumashim. So, the source sheet that I gave you has their source sheets in the back. Does everyone have? If people don't have, pass forward. There are source sheets. There are all of 0 sources on this source sheet. Right? There are no psukim. What I have given you is charts, lists of what we find in the 5 books of Chumash, and I want to, as best as we can, uncover the theme of each book as we go through the snapshot view of what are each of these 5 books that we call the Chumash, that we call the books of the Torah. When I was in Yeshiva at Mitzion, when we start any book, right, Liebtag, right, Menachem Liebtag would make us take out our Koren Tanachs or our Simanim Tanachs, which, you know, the little, anyone has, I don't know if anyone has here. Does anyone have one to show? No. Okay, that's fine. Oh, you do. We borrow it just for a second. Thank you. There are the little blue versions of this as well. But he would tell us to have these Chumashim, which have nothing in them, no commentary, no nothing. And he would just say, okay, outline the whole book. Right, just go. Right, and then he would go and take a coffee break, and he'd come back 15 minutes later, and he would say, just summarize the book. Right? If you have an art scroll, this is easy. Right? They've done it for you. You just look on the side of the page, there are little summaries by every little chapter. You can do it. And you'll discover that there are themes. There are themes that connect the books. Without parshanut, without commentary, there are themes that emerge. So, let's look at what they are. And first source here, this is Bereshit. So let's start with Bereshit, okay? The structure of Bereshit. If I asked you, okay, what is Bereshit about? What's Bereshit about? Oh, I'm sorry, before I forget this, I should have mentioned this at the beginning. But this is when I miss one of the introductory notes. This year is sponsored by my parents, by Beth and Mark Ziring, in loving memory of my mother's father, my grandfather, Chaim Ezra ben Chanach Eliyahu, as his, what would have been his 100th birthday is approaching in January, I believe it is 18th. So this year is dedicated in his memory. Okay, back to Bereshit. So if I ask you, what is the theme of Bereshit? Origin. What else? Infancy. Great. What do Chazal call the book?
Creation of the Jewish people.
Creation of the Jewish people. What do Chazal call the book? So they have different names. One is Sefer HaYashar, right, the book of the upright. Another Sefer HaYetzirah, the book of creation. Now, simply the fact that Chazal have names for the book tell you that I'm not crazy. Chazal think there are themes, right? They have themes. Bereshit is Sefer HaYashar, Sefer HaYetzirah. Shemot is Sefer HaGeulah, the book of redemption. Vayikra is Torah Kohanim, the laws of priests. We'll come back to that in a little bit. Bamidbar is Sefer HaPkudim, the book of Numbers, which is a bit of a weird book. A bit of a weird name for the book, because while it's true it opens with a census and it has a second census about 2/3 through, that's the only numbers in the book of any note. And then Devarim, Deuteronomy, Mishnah Torah, which again we'll come to as a bit of a weird name. But let's go through what is in Breshit. How does Breshit start? I gave you the chart here, so you don't have to guess. How does Breshit start? So I've given you two divisions. Look on the right-hand side for just a minute, right? The thematic summary of Breshit. How does it start? First thing. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim et haaretz. The world was created. Then we move to Gan Eden. We move to the Garden of Eden, and what do we get right away? What the Christians would call original sin. We get sin. We're kicked out of Gan Eden. Great. Then we get the 10 generations. Well, we really get the second sin, right? We get Cain and Hevel as well, but we have two major sins at the beginning, and then we have 10 generations until Noah. We're told of the world's corruption, until God decides he has to destroy the world. He destroys the world in the big next story, which is the flood, the Mabul. He destroys the world, he starts again. Then Noah has 3 sons. We hear about their generations. The next major story that we hear is the Tower of Babel, the Tower of Babel, when God mixes up the languages of the whole world. Then, after this story sort of the world, we move to the Jewish story. And we get Avram, we get Yitzchak, we get Yaakov, and then really we get Yosef, right? If you think of the person who gets the most chapters in Breshit, by sheer number, it is actually Yosef, right? We don't really think of it that way, but the story either of Yaakov's children, but really the saga of Yosef is from chapter 37 to chapter 50. And then the end of Breshit, everybody dies, and we move on to a new book where we start with the Jewish people. That's basically Breshit in a nutshell. But what is the point? What is the point of Breshit? Now, the first person, you open up CHUMASH, and right away, if you learn in a traditional school, they'll probably give you the first Rashi, and Rashi asks the question, not only do I not know the theme of Breshit, I don't even know why this book is here. He quotes Rabbi Yitzchak, he said, I don't get the whole point from beginning to end. We should have just skipped to the first commandment of the Jewish people, because isn't the Torah a book of laws? And then he answers, no, we're given Breshit so that one day when the non-Jews will say, why do you have a right to the land of Israel? We'll get to say, God created the world. But according to Rashi, quoting Rabbi Yitzchak, that doesn't help you so much with the theme of the book. He just says, right, this was sort of a backstory, but okay, that explains Breshit, and then a lot of extra details, but what is the point of the book? What is the theme? What organizes the book? Is it just the background story from creation, and then you just got to practically list the details until we get to the Jewish people, but the book has no organizing theme? It's just sort of it's the prequel, right? Meaning, the way Rashi basically presents it is, sure, Shemot is the first book of the Torah, and Breshit is the prequel, right? If you're reading the Lord of the Rings and you really want to understand it, so then you need to read whatever it is, the Silmarillion or whatever it is, right, that tells you or the Hobbit or whatever the case may be, right, or you won't understand the story. You could pick up in Shemot, but you'd miss some details, and if you wanted to explain our history, you wouldn't have it. The Ramban challenges Rashi, and he says, no, there's a point to this book. This book is important. We have to know what people did. We have to be inspired by the Yesharim, by the Avot. We have to learn what it means to be a Jew. But that still doesn't get us as far as saying, okay, well, what is the organizing theme of Breshit? If you want to get a hint of what the theme of Breshit is, though, so you got to look at the left-hand side here. Is on the right-hand side, I've summarized Breshit, as I think most of you would have. If I'd asked you to summarize Breshit, you would have come up with something like what's on the right. Right? There's creation, there's sin, there's the flood, there's the Tower of Babel, there's Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and then we could argue, Yosef, the Shvatim, you would have done that. But if you look at the book literarily, you look at how the author of the book, right, God, actually divides our book There's a different division, 11 divisions in the book, and it has nothing to do with themes. And it has to do with, I think you said it, origin. A word called a tolada, right? Ele, toldot, etc. These are the origins of, these are the children of, the offspring of. Now, the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th of these origins you all expect. Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and then we get some of the others. We find out Yishmael, we find out Shem, we find out Terach, right? Technically it's Adam, Noach, then the children of Noach, Shem, who's the son of Noach from whom Avram comes, then it's Terach, who's the father of Avram, then you get Yishmael, because Yishmael is once Yishmael is separated out of the family, so we get his generations, and then you get Yitzchak, and then Esav, right? Esav is also explained, his descent, and then you get Yaakov. But that's not the first time the words Ele Toladot, these are the children of, come in the book. The first time is actually, if you open up to CHUMASH, I gave it to you, it's Perek Aleph, right? Right? Yeah, sorry, it's Perek Bet, really? In Pasuk Dalet, you'll find out the first, right? Bereshit to the beginning of the second chapter describe the 7 days of creation. You find out why that's important in 2:4, and that is Elet Toldot Hashamayim V'Haaretz Bihi Baram. These are the children of heaven and earth. Right at the beginning, the earth is described as Toldot Hashamayim V'Haaretz Bihi Baram. Who is the Toldot Hashamayim V'Haaretz Bihi Baram? Who is the child of heaven and earth? So if you look, you continue. These are the children. You're waiting. Who are the children of earth? Who could be the child of heaven and earth? You look at verse. You look at 7. You look at Pasuk Zion. Vayitzer Adonai Elohim min ha'adam afar min ha'adama vayipach b'apav nishmat chayim vayeh adam lenefesh chaya. And God created man, earth, from dust from the earth, and He blew into him a divine spirit. In other words, who are his parents? Ele Toldot Hashamayim V'Haaretz Bihi Baram. He's the child of heaven and earth. Literally. His body is from the earth, and his soul is from heaven. Mankind itself is merely the child of heaven and earth. And the literary structure of Bereshit is the book of Sefer HaToladot, the book of origins, the book of offspring. Is how does the world come into being? But it's more than that. When God started the world, who was supposed to be His chosen nation? The whole world. When you open Sefer Shemot, who is God's chosen nation? Right? Am Yisrael, the children of Israel. That's how it starts, right? Sefer Shemot starts with Shemot. Ve'ele Shemot b'nei Yisrael habayim Mitzrayim. These are the names of the children of Israel. If you open Chumash, you open Shemot, the first question you ask is, how did it come to be that God chose a nation instead of humanity? The answer to that question is Bereshit. Right? The book of Bereshit is the story of how God goes from pure universalism to particularism. How God goes from choosing all of humanity to choosing a Jewish people. And if you follow both the literary and the thematic division of Bereshit, you'll find that this is the point of the book. Ele Toldot Hashamayim V'Haaretz Bihi Baram. These are the offspring of the world itself. Humanity is the offspring of heaven and earth. They should have been God's chosen people, meaning God shouldn't have needed a chosen people. But they sinned. Adam sinned. So he gets kicked out of Gan Eden. But God continues to try for all of humanity. But then what happens between Ele Toldot Hashamayim V'Haaretz and then Ele Toldot Adam, the children of Adam, and the next 10 generations? What happens in those 10 generations? They are corrupt. God can't choose them. So he tries again, and there's a flood. And he starts again. Eila Toldot Noach, the second attempt at universalism. At Noach, who is all of humanity, but a purified choice of humanity, because he's killed everybody else off. And then he chooses his chosen son. Eila Toldot Shem. Why does he choose Shem? Because Ham is cursed. Because Ham sins. So Shem is chosen. Shem is going to be the father of the chosen nation. But that doesn't quite work either, because you find out that there's Migdal Bavel, that people sin again. So then you find out Eila Toldot Terach. There was a person named Terach who had a child, and his name was Avram. And God changes his mind. God no longer chooses humanity in its entirety. He chooses a nation. You think it's going to be Avram, but who is Avram? Av Hamon Goyim Nisaticha. I have given you as the father of many nations. Are all of his children going to be chosen? No, they're not. Eila Toldot Yitzchak. These are the children of Yitzchak. And why do you hear Eila Toldot Yishmael? Why do we run through the generations of Yishmael and Breshit? Because he ceases to be important, so to speak. Not really, but in the story of Breshit. What about Yitzchak? Is all of Yitzchak's children chosen? No, you find out Eila Toldot Esav. These are Esav. They're not chosen either. So here's their lineage. And then the book zeroes in. Eila Toldot Yaakov. These are the children of Yaakov. Yosef. Yosef brings them down to Mitzrayim, and the book ends with 70 people. 70 children of Yaakov in Egypt, and Shmot starts off. Ve'ela Shmot Anashim. These are the Jews. And Breshit answers one question. How do you get from creation? How do you get from universalism? How did it happen that God chose a nation instead of all of humanity? And that is the question of Breshit. That is the theme of Breshit, is telling you the story of how we go from Adam being chosen to Yaakov being chosen. Shmot. Now let's move to Shmot. Act 2. Shmot is now the story of the Jewish people. Shmot is much easier than Breshit. Left-hand side, there are 5 things that happen in Shmot. That's it. That is it. Mitzrayim, right, the story of the Exodus and all its details. 2 is theophany. Ma'amad Har Sinai, the Torah being given. 3 is the Mishkan, right, is the command regarding the tabernacle. 4 is the Jews mess up royally with Chet HaEgel. And 5 is, despite the fact that we mess up, we build the Mishkan. That is Shmot. 5 things. That's it. It's an easy book. Sefer HaGeulah. But what is the theme of Shmot? If Breshit is the story of how we go from God choosing humanity to God choosing the Jewish people, Shmot is the story. Everything is the story of the Jewish people from now on. But specifically, what is the story of Shmot? If I took those 5 things, Yetziat Mitzrayim, Ma'amad Har Sinai, right, the Exodus, the giving of the Torah, the Mishkan, the sin of the golden calf, and the Mishkan again. What is the theme of Shmot? What? Birth of a nation, but more. Yes, identity. And what is our identity? What stands right in the middle of Sefer Shmot? Ma'amad Har Sinai. Shmot answers the question. Breshit answers, how do we get to be a nation? Shmot answers the question, what is the identity of that nation? And what is the identity of that nation? Anochi Hashem Elokecha Asher Hotzeiticha Meretz Mitzrayim. It starts off by telling us that we forge our national story because God takes us out of Egypt. Then he gives us the Torah and he gives us a command. And then he tells us, I want you to continue Har Sinai. I want to continue Ma'amad Har Sinai. By the way, Mishpatim, there's a lot of laws in there, but those are the laws given at Har Sinai. But those are the laws given while they're still at Sinai. Then God says, it's not enough. It's not enough for me that I spoke to you at Har Sinai. I want a place to be among you. And that place is the Mishkan. The Ramban notes this, that the Mishkan is a perpetual Har Sinai, proving that is a shir for another time. But the Mishkan is where God's presence continues to live amongst the Jewish people. And then what's Chet HaEgel? Chet HaEgel is we messed up. We broke that covenant. And God doesn't want to forgive us. But Moshe fights for us. And then Moshe convinces God to be among us. How does he convince him? The Yud Gimel Midot HaRachamim. He says to God, you can't have a relationship with the people if you live purely according to justice. Let's reforge a relationship with you, but this time based on mercy. And then what does God respond? I will do it. And how do we see that he does it? Because Shemot ends the way it was supposed to. Meaning with the Mishkan. That even though we mess up our relationship with God, he wants to dwell among us anyways. Shemot answers question 2. Which is, that nation is born. Who are they? What is their identity? And that their identity is a nation in a relationship with God through the medium of, partially of command. And that is Shemot. But Shemot doesn't end the story. Because Shemot, if you look at the end of Shemot, if you have a Chumash, open to the last psukim of Shemot. Literally the last, all the way at the end. So, chapter 40. Chapter 40. Okay. End of Shemot, chapter 40. The last 5 verses. Lamed Dalet, 34. The cloud of God descends onto the tent of meeting, and God's Spirit fills the tabernacle, fills the Mishkan. And Moshe couldn't enter the tabernacle because God's Spirit was too intense. What should be the next verse? If you were writing a book, what should be the next verse? The cloud covers the tabernacle. Moshe can't come in. What should the next verse be?
Hashem speaks to Moshe.
Hashem speaks to Moshe and he lets him in. And he didn't get in, but eventually he gets in. What is the next verse? And when the cloud would lift, the Jews would travel. We jump to the future and we say that when the cloud would lift, they would move, but the cloud didn't lift. So here's one of the coolest things, that if you notice this, you'll understand Chumash much better. Open up to Vayikra Pasuk Aleph. Vayikra el Moshe vaydaber Adonai elav me'ol moed lemor. God calls to Moshe from the Ohel Moed. What does that sound like? The continuation of Pasuk Lamed Hey. Moshe wants to get into the Ohel Moed. He can't get in, so what happens? God calls out to him. Open up to the first Pasuk of Bamidbar. Skip, book 4. How does Bamidbar start? What's Bamidbar start with? The Jews are at Sinai, and what are they doing? We're organizing the census. How? In a camp, because we're traveling. Or in Perikhet, Vayhi bin Soa Haron Vayomer Moshe Kuma Adonai ve'afutzu oivecha v'nusum misanecha mipanecha. Meaning, when does the second half of the end of Shemot pick up? Bamidbar. Right? Liptak pointed that out to me years ago when I was in Yeshiva, and I gave it to you on the right-hand side. Shemot ends with a double cliffhanger. It ends with 2 questions. One is, how does God interact in the Mishkan? 2 is, how does God interact when they travel? Those 2 psukim set up the next 2 books. The next 2 books. Because Vayikra picks up on the first half of that story, which is God calling out from the Mishkan, and Bamidbar picks up on the second half of the story, which is God helping the Jews travel. Bamidbar and Vayikra are both just continuations of the story in Shemot. They're 2 different prongs. They're not contiguous. They're simultaneous. And you know how I know they're simultaneous? And again, I can't spend all the time on it, but you look at the bottom on the right-hand side of 2, because there's one day that appears 3 times in Chumash. Once in Shemot, once in Vayikra, and once in Bamidbar. And that is the day of the dedication of the Mishkan, Rosh Chodesh Nisan. You hear a description of that day 3 times. One at the end of Shemot, when the Mishkan is finished. Once in Vayikra, when Bayom HaShmini, the 8th day of dedication, and they bring the dedication korbanot, and then again Bamidbar, when the Nisiim come and give their gift, as the Mishkan is being dedicated, when the tribal leaders come and give the gift. The same day is repeated 3 times, because it's the same story. Imagine a movie, right? If you are watching different characters, you see it consecutively in the movie, but it's happening simultaneously. Shemot opens the next 2 books, which are really 2 prongs of the story of Shemot. Because if Shemot is the story of the identity of the Jewish people, a nation connected with God, there are 2 ways in which we connect with God, and that is Vayikra and Bamidbar. One way is in the confines of the Mishkan. So that moves us to Vayikra. What is the nickname of Sefer Vayikra? Torah Kohanim. It's the laws of the Mishkan. Vayikra answers the question, what does it look like for a nation to have a relationship with God in the Mishkan? Sort of. Because look at 3. This is from Wikipedia. You don't have to look at sort of highfalutin sources to get the problems of it. Summary of Sefer Vayikra. Laws of sacrifice, institution of the priesthood. That all I get. That's Torah Kohanim. But then, uncleanliness and its treatment. Okay. Impurity, I sort of get it. Some of it has to do with the Mishkan. Some of it doesn't. But then you get Yom HaKippurim. Okay. But then look at V. Then you get the laws of holiness. Sacrifice and food, right? Kashrut. Sexual behavior. And then ethical laws. Neighborliness, right? V'ahavta l'recha kamocha. You get the laws of the holidays. You get laws of blasphemy. You get laws of the sabbatical. You get laws of the Jubilee. I'm skipping a bit here. Tell me, if Vayikra is the story of how the Jews exist in the Mishkan, why is Kashrut there, and why are holidays there? And why is V'ahavta l'recha kamocha there? How does it fit into the theme?
It's all holiness stuff.
Ah. So the answer lies in one pasuk. It is holiness. But what does holiness have to do with kashrut or v'ahavta l'recha kamocha? And how does that fit with Torah Kohanim? So David Tzvi Hoffman answers very simply. There's one key verse that you need to understand. What's the verse?
I'm Kohanim to you.
Yes, v'am to you. Right? You will be for me, mamlechet Kohanim, v'goy kadosh. In Shemot you find out who is a Kohen. There are 2 Kohanim in this world. The priests and the Jewish people are the Kohanim. Vayikra isn't the story of the priests. It's not the story of the Mishkan. It's the story of how sanctity emanates from the Mishkan to sanctify everybody else. And therefore it's the story of 2 Kohanim. The first half is the story of the Kohanim in the Mishkan. The second half of the book is what it means for the rest of us. The Mamlechet Kohanim, the Goy Kadosh. And what does that mean? Kedoshim Tihu. V'ahavta l'recha kamocha. Love your neighbor as yourself. Everything that you find in Vayikra Yotet. Vayikra is what does it mean for the Jews to be holy in and out of the Mishkan. Bamidbar is then the story of what does it mean not to experience God in holiness, but to experience God, what's left? In the mundane. Because God expresses his relationship to the Jewish people in the Mishkan and Vahi ben Soah ha'aron. That traveling, simply walking through life, God is also with us. And Bamidbar tells us the story of what it means to experience God in the mundane, in our travels, not in the Mishkan and non-ritual law, but simply in our travels through life, our travels through the Midbar. But it's a bit more than that, because the story of Bamidbar is quite specific. Bamidbar opens with a census. Why does it open with a census and the description of the camp? Why should Bamidbar start with a census? Why is that important?
It's a preparation for the conquest.
Good. It's a preparation for the conquest of Israel. How long is it supposed to be before they conquer Israel?
3 days.
Yeah, a few days, right? A few days. At most, how does Devarim start? How long should it have taken us from Har Sinai into Eretz Israel? 11 days. 11 Yomei Chorev. Bamidbar opens and says, this is how you travel through in preparation to get into Israel. How long does Bamidbar take?
4 years.
40 years.
39.
Well, whatever, 38, 39, whatever it is, right? Why does it take that long?
They keep arguing.
Because they make a grave error. What's the grave error they make? The spies. The middle of the Sefer has another census. Why does it have a second census? Because it's after the 38 years, and after the Mageifa, and now what are they doing again? Getting ready for Eretz Yisrael. What is Bamidbar the story of? It's the story of how God interacts with us in mundane life. But more specifically, it's the story of how the Jews get from Egypt to Israel. But it has 3 stories. What it was supposed to look like, how we messed up, and therefore it didn't look like that, and then how it ends up looking. Right? You look at number 4. You can follow the structure. It's the organizing of the camp, dedication of the Mishkan, the appointment of the Leviim, the offerings of the Karban Pesach, the gathering by the trumpets, leaving Har Sinai. Then 11, 12, 13, 14 is sins, the complaints against Moshe, the Meraglim, and the punishment. Then Korach, then everybody dies. You don't hear about their death, it just happens. And then the next story you pick up with is the events of the 40th year. And then we do it again. Bamidbar is, 1, the story of how the Jews interact with God in our mundane life, but it's also just the simple story. How do we get from Egypt to Israel? In 3 parts, which is, and Chazal say, there are really 3 svarim in Bamidbar. Until Vahi ben Soara, Vahi ben Soa, and then the second half. Meaning, what it should have looked like, what it did look like, right? The mistake, and then how it looks in the end. How we end up coming into the land of Israel. That's Bamidbar. And then Dvarim is a pretty easy book. It's a speech. It's really 4 speeches. 4 speeches. Chapter 1 through 4, chapter 5 through 26, chapters 27 and 28, chapter 29 and 30, and then Moshe dies. It's Moshe's end of life. It's called Mishneh Torah. By the way, going back to Bamidbar for a second, Chumash Pekudim, the book of Numbers. Why is Numbers important? Because the 2 senses bracket the 2 parts of the story. What it should have looked like and what it did look like. Right? That is the theme of the book. What it should have looked like, what it did look like. The census before story 1 and the census before story 2. Dvarim, Mishneh Torah. Dvarim doesn't repeat the Torah. Why is it called Mishneh Torah?
Second Torah?
So, maybe, but the simplest understanding is it is a repeat. It is a repeat of the Torah. But what Torah?
The story.
So not really the story, partially the story, and the laws. But which laws? Exactly. It's the stories that were given. It was the laws that were given at Sinai, but specifically what type of laws? Exactly. The laws that we need to build a nation in Eretz Israel. Why don't we hear about it until Dvarim?
Not relevant.
Well, close. It was supposed to be relevant. Meaning, when did the Jews first hear Dvarim? Probably at Sinai. But they all died. So they got to hear it again. We're hearing it for the first time because this is how history played out. But it wasn't supposed to be. This was the laws that were given at Sinai. This was the laws of building a nation in Eretz Israel. Dvarim is simply the instructions of how do you go from a nomadic people in the desert to a nation-building people in the land of Israel. Here's Moshe's instructions, and he needs to repeat it. And why is there a narrative there? Because what does the story explain? Why the first generation didn't get to use these laws. Mostly what's there is the laws. But Moshe has to provide enough narrative to explain why it's the second generation who are implementing them. So now we have Chumash. We have, as I called it, a divine act in 5 plays. The first book is how the Jewish people get chosen instead of humanity. The second book, Sefer HaGeulah, tells us what is our identity. How do we forge a relationship with God? Vayikra tells us how does that people forge a relationship in the world of ritual. both in the Mishkan, the Kohanim there, and V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, Torat Kohanim, Atem Tiyulim, Mamlechet Kohanim v'Goy Kadosh. How does sanctity emanate out of the Mishkan? But Midbar tells us how that people has a relationship with God in the mundane, and how we were supposed to get to Israel, and how we actually did. And then Dvarim gives us the instructions and says, how do you build that nation in a land? What does it look like to go from being a nomadic people to being a nation in the land? And that is the book. Those are the 5 books of Chumash. That is the divine play in 5 acts. Each book has a theme. Each book pushes history forward. Each book tells you something fundamental about what it means to be a Jew and what it means to live in this world. But there's more to it. And we have 5 minutes, so let me just throw some curveballs in. One question you have to ask, let's say between Breshit and Shemot. When God chose the Jewish people, did he choose them? When we moved from universalism to particularism, did God decide to abandon the rest of the world? Or did he not change goals, but he changed means? Meaning, was his original goal, I want all people to serve me, and then he gave up on that, gave up on that and said, I only want the Jews? Or did he say, I want humanity to serve me, I tried directly educating him, it doesn't work, so let me choose a nation who will teach them? That's the question you have to ask between Breshit and Shemot, and what seems to be the answer to that question? And that comes back to what we said about Vayikra. Atem tiyulim mamlechet kohanim v'goy kadosh. What is the role of the Kohanim for the Jewish people? Teachers. So if we're Kohanim, who are we the Kohanim to? The world, which means what was the story from Breshit to Shemot? Not how we rejected the world, but how God chose methods, not goals. How he went from directly educating humanity to choosing a nation who would educate humanity for him. And how would we do that? Dvarim, by building a model nation in Eretz Yisrael. So you don't just have to understand the books, you need to understand the interaction between those books. And that's something you've got to keep in mind as you go through Chumash. And the last point, and this is something I heard from Rabbi Yitzchak Et Shalom, there's a totally another way of looking at these, or an additional level. We interact with God at 5 levels. Breshit is how we interact with God as human beings. Shemot is how we interact with God as Jews. Vayikra is how we interact with God as priests, right? As holy people. Bamidbar is how we interact with God as tribes and families. Right? We travel through the desert as tribes and families. And Dvarim is how we interact with God as Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha, B'chol levavcha, B'chol nafshecha, B'chol meodecha. Love God as individuals. There are multiple themes, but Bamidbar is a divine act, a divine play in 5 acts, as I said. It's the unfolding of the Jewish people, how we go from humanity to a nation of sanctified priests, to a nation who can interact with God in the mundane as we travel through the desert, and then as a nation of nation builders, as a people of nation builders who can build a model nation, Israel. But it's also the story of how we interact with God at 5 levels, as human beings, as Jews, as priests, as families, and as individuals. And therefore, when you look at Chumash, what I want you to think about next time you read the Parsha is that you may be reading it over the course of 3 months. It may be a Parsha, but that's not how God revealed it to us. God revealed us a divine play in 5 acts. Each act has a theme. Each act has an idea. Each act has a message, and if we want to have a complete relationship with God, we need to understand the 5 levels and the transition as we move through the 5 books. And if we do that, then we'll understand the message that God wants us to walk away with. We'll understand the summary and the playbill of this divine play, and we'll understand the full complexity of what it means to be Ovdei Hashem, who've internalized the messages of the 5 books, the Chamisha Chumshei Torah, that make up our most important text. And we move on with that to Yoshua.
Sure.
We're moving rooms. Okay.
Where are we going?